This is the image they tried to bury. This is the footage the networks cut away from after 30 seconds because nobody in a Washington studio knows how to explain what it means. A pipeline valve station on the Alberta-Montana border, sealed shut. Yellow caution tape wrapped around the access road. Canadian Mounties standing guard next to idle tanker trucks that were pumping 4 million barrels of crude oil per day into the American heartland just 48 hours ago. As of 6 a.m. this morning, Saturday, February 28, 2026, those pumps are dead. The oil is not flowing. For the first time in the history of the North American energy relationship, Canada has officially, formally, and completely blocked all crude oil shipments to the United States. This is not a negotiation tactic. This is not a diplomatic warning shot. This is a full embargo. And by Monday morning, every gas station between Minneapolis and Miami will feel the impact. Breaking news from Ottawa confirms that Prime Minister Mark Carney signed an emergency order in Council at 11 p.m. Eastern last night, invoking the Canadian Energy Security Act, authorizing the immediate suspension of all petroleum exports to the United States effective at midnight. Sources inside the Privy Council office say the order was drafted in secrecy over the past 72 hours, shared with fewer than 8 people in the Canadian government, and timed deliberately to land on a weekend when American futures markets are closed and the White House is at its thinnest staffing. The timing is surgical. The intent is devastation. We are talking about 4.3 million barrels of crude per day that just vanished from American supply chains. We are talking about 61% of total U.S. crude oil imports gone overnight. We are talking about the single largest energy disruption on American soil since the 1973 Arab oil embargo, and arguably worse, because this oil was already priced into every refinery contract, every futures position, and every gas station margin from coast to coast. In this special report, we are going to break down exactly how Canada pulled this off. We are going to explain the financial mechanics of why gas prices will hit $7 a gallon within 72 hours. We are going to reveal the retaliatory chain reaction that is already cascading through the White House, the Pentagon, and Wall Street. And we are going to answer the question nobody in Washington wants to ask out loud. Did America just lose its energy independence to its own neighbor? Buckle up. The pumps are off. The clock is ticking. To understand why the valves are closed this morning, you have to go back 90 days to the trade war that started this catastrophe. In December 2025, the Trump administration imposed a sweeping 25% tariff on all Canadian imports, including lumber, steel, aluminum, dairy, and critically refined petroleum products. The justification was national security and trade rebalancing, the same language used against China. But Canada is not China. Canada is the largest trading partner of the United States. Two-way trade between the two countries exceeded $900 billion in 2025. The Canadian economy absorbed the first round of tariffs with gritted teeth. Lumber prices in Vancouver collapsed 31%. The Canadian dollar dropped to 68 cents against the US dollar. Unemployment in Ontario's manufacturing corridor spiked to 9.2%. For 3 months, Ottawa negotiated. Carney flew to Washington twice. According to leaked diplomatic cables obtained by the Globe and Mail, Trump reportedly told Carney in a January meeting that Canada should just become the 51st state and the tariff problem goes away. That was the moment the Canadian government decided negotiation was over. Here is the technical mechanism that makes this embargo so devastating and so fast. Canada does not ship oil to America on tanker ships that can be rerouted in days. It ships through pipelines, fixed infrastructure, bolted to the earth. The Keystone pipeline system carries 622,000 barrels per day from Alberta to refineries in Illinois and the Gulf Coast. The Enbridge Line 5 carries 540,000 barrels per day through Michigan to refineries in Sarnia and Toledo. The Enbridge Main Line, the largest pipeline system in the world, moves 3.1 million barrels per day of crude and liquids across the border. The Trans Mountain expansion, completed in 2024 at a cost of $34 billion Canadian, was supposed to send bitumen to the Pacific for Asian markets, but 40% of its capacity was still feeding U.S. West Coast refineries. The total pipeline infrastructure connecting Canadian crude to American refineries represents over $180 billion in capital investment built over 50 years. Shutting it down is not like turning off a faucet. It is like severing an artery. The refineries in the Midwest, places like the BP Whiting refinery in Indiana, the largest in the region at 435,000 barrels per day capacity, are specifically engineered to process heavy Canadian crude. They cannot switch to light sweet crude from the Permian Basin overnight. The metallurgy is different. The coking units are calibrated for bitumen. Retooling takes 18 to 24 months and costs $2 to $4 billion per facility. This is the trap. America built its refining infrastructure around Canadian oil, and now that oil is gone. But here is the catch that nobody in the mainstream media is explaining. The embargo does not just affect crude oil. Canada supplies 85% of America's imported natural gas. The Alliance Pipeline and the TC Energy System push 8.4 billion cubic feet per day into the northern United States. If Carney extends the embargo to natural gas, and sources inside the PMO say the contingency order is already drafted, the heating crisis alone would be catastrophic. February is not over. Temperatures in the upper Midwest are forecast at minus 15 degrees Fahrenheit next week. Natural gas powers 47% of American home heating. The Strategic Petroleum Reserve, which Trump already drew down by 42% during his first confrontation with OPEC in 2025, contains approximately 347 million barrels, down from a peak of 727 million in 2009. At current consumption rates of 20.1 million barrels per day, with 4.3 million now missing from the supply chain, the SPR could supplement the gap for roughly 80 days. But releasing SPR crude requires a presidential order, a 13-day minimum logistics window to get the oil from the salt caverns in Louisiana and Texas to the refineries, and the political willingness to admit publicly that America cannot fuel itself. None of those conditions are simple. Sources inside the West Wing describe the mood as apocalyptic. President Trump was reportedly briefed on the embargo at 2 a.m. Saturday morning by the National Security Advisor. According to two people familiar with the call, his first reaction was not about energy policy. It was about the price of gasoline and what it would do to his approval rating, which already sits at 38% according to the latest Reuters Ipsos tracking poll. He reportedly asked whether he could blame Canada's move on the Democrats. The political math is brutal. Gas prices in America averaged $3.42 per gallon before the embargo. Analysts at Goldman Sachs released an emergency note at 4 a.m. Saturday, projecting a range of $5.80 to $7.20 per gallon within 5 business days, depending on the duration of the shutdown and the pace of SPR releases. JP Morgan's energy desk went further, modeling a scenario where sustained embargo plus a cold snap pushes wholesale gasoline above $4.50 per gallon, translating to pump prices of $8 or more in California and the Northeast. Every dollar increase in gas prices costs the average American household $1,400 per year. A move from $3.42 to $7 is an additional $5,000 per household. For retirees on fixed incomes, for families already stretched by inflation, this is not an inconvenience. This is a financial catastrophe. This is the moment your 401k stops mattering because you cannot afford to drive to work. It gets worse. The cascade has already started in the commodities markets. Brent crude futures, trading on the ICE exchange in London, where markets were open during Asian hours, spiked from $74 per barrel to $112 per barrel in overnight trading, a 51% surge that triggered 3 separate circuit breakers. West Texas Intermediate, the U.S. benchmark, is projected to open Monday at $105 to $115, levels not seen since the Russian invasion of Ukraine in 2022. Heating oil futures jumped 38%. Diesel, the lifeblood of the American trucking industry, surged 44% in European pre-market trading. Diesel prices affect everything. Every product on every shelf in every Walmart was delivered by a truck burning diesel. When diesel goes from $4 to $6.50 a gallon, the cost of a gallon of milk goes up, the cost of Amazon delivery goes up, the cost of building a house goes up. This is an inflationary bomb detonating at the center of an economy that was already running a 4.1% CPI before the embargo hit. Here is what the White House is considering right now, and this is where the situation moves from energy crisis to constitutional crisis. Sources say the president convened an emergency National Security Council meeting at 8 a.m. this morning. 3 options are on the table. Option 1, immediate retaliatory tariffs of 100% on all Canadian goods, essentially an economic declaration of war. The problem is Canada exports $423 billion worth of goods to the U.S. annually. Tariffing all of it collapses bilateral trade and triggers a recession in both countries. Option 2, invoke the International Emergency Economic Powers Act and seize Canadian government assets held in American banks, estimated at $38 billion, plus freeze the accounts of Canadian crown corporations operating on U.S. soil. This is the financial nuclear option. It would be the first time IEEPA has been used against a NATO ally and the closest treaty partner the United States has. If you think markets are panicking now, imagine the signal this sends to every other country holding dollar-denominated assets. The world watches what America does to Canada and recalculates the risk of parking their reserves in U.S. treasuries. Option 3, and reportedly the one gaining traction among the hawks in the cabinet, invoke Article 5 adjacent provisions under NORAD and send U.S. military engineers to physically seize and reopen the pipeline valve stations on the Canadian side of the border. Military action against Canada. The fact that this is even being discussed in the Situation Room tells you how desperate the situation has become. But here is the hidden connection that nobody is talking about. The Japanese bond crisis that we have been covering for weeks did not just crash Tokyo. It crashed the global energy financing market. The yen carry trade, which funded an estimated $1.2 trillion in commodity derivatives and energy futures positions, unwound violently when the Bank of Japan raised rates. When those positions liquidated, it sucked liquidity out of the very market mechanisms that would normally absorb a supply shock like this. In a normal world, when Canadian oil disappears, traders arbitrage. They buy crude from West Africa, from the North Sea, from Brazil, and reroute it to American ports. But the financing for those trades depends on credit lines that are currently frozen because the banks that provide them are hemorrhaging capital from their Japanese bond exposure. The Japan crisis did not cause the Canadian embargo, but it removed every shock absorber from the system. It is like pulling the airbags out of a car right before the crash. The collision is now unsurvivable for energy prices. Let us get technical about what happens to the American refining sector when 4.3 million barrels per day of heavy crude disappears. The United States has 130 operating refineries with a combined capacity of 18.1 million barrels per day. Of those, approximately 45 refineries in the Midwest and Gulf Coast regions are configured primarily for heavy sour crude, the thick bitumen that comes from the Alberta oil sands. These facilities represent roughly 8.2 million barrels per day of capacity. Without Canadian feedstock, they cannot run at full output. They can blend, they can substitute with Venezuelan heavy crude if sanctions allow, they can try Mexican Maya crude, but the volume is not there. Venezuela's entire export capacity is 600,000 barrels per day. Mexico has been cutting exports for years to feed its own new Dos Bocas refinery. The math does not work. Within 2 weeks, according to internal modeling from the Department of Energy that was leaked to Reuters on Friday, between 15 and 22 Midwest refineries will be forced to reduce throughput by 30 to 60%. Refinery utilization rates, currently at 92% nationally, could drop to 65%. That has not happened since Hurricane Katrina in 2005, and even then, it lasted only 6 weeks because the infrastructure was damaged, not deliberately embargoed by an ally. Let us push the scenario to the extreme. It is Wednesday, March 4th. The embargo has been in place for 4 full days. Gas stations in the upper Midwest are running dry. Lines stretch around blocks in Minneapolis, Chicago, and Detroit. The governor of Michigan has declared a state of emergency. The National Guard has been deployed to prevent looting at gas stations, which sounds insane until you remember that gasoline hoarding during the Colonial Pipeline hack in 2021 caused fistfights at pumps in the Carolinas over a disruption that lasted 5 days and affected only the East Coast. Now multiply that panic by 50. Trucking companies are rationing fuel. Walmart announces delivery delays of 7 to 10 days for non-essential goods. Amazon suspends same-day and next-day delivery in 23 states. The Dow Jones has crashed 2,800 points since Monday's open, a 6.2% decline that triggers panic selling across global equity markets. The VIX Volatility Index spikes to 48, territory not seen since the COVID crash of March 2020. And the President of the United States is on Truth Social at 3 a.m., calling Mark Carney a traitor and threatening to annex Alberta. How does this play in Peoria? The MAGA base is split down the middle. One faction sees this as proof that America should have built the Keystone XL expansion, drilled more aggressively on federal land, and never allowed itself to depend on foreign oil, even from Canada. They blame the environmentalists and the Democrats who fought domestic production for decades. This faction is angry, but not at Trump. They want war. The other faction, the working-class families who voted for Trump because he promised $2 gas and a booming economy, are watching their household budgets eviscerate in real time. Gas at $7. Groceries up 15% because of diesel shipping costs. Their home heating bill doubled in a single month. They do not care about trade theory or tariff strategy. They care about survival, and they are starting to ask a question that is politically fatal for this presidency. If he is so smart, why did he start a trade war with the country that heats our homes and fuels our cars? What does Putin see when he watches this unfold? He sees validation. He sees the Western alliance fracturing over a trade dispute while he consolidates his gains in eastern Ukraine. What does Xi Jinping see? He sees an opportunity to position China as the stable energy partner for the developing world, while America cannot even keep its own refineries running. What does OPEC see? They see leverage they have not had since 1979. Saudi Arabia could increase production to help stabilize markets. But why would they? Every dollar increase in crude prices puts $300 million per day into Saudi government coffers. The Saudis are reportedly furious about Trump's public demands for lower oil prices earlier this year. Mohammed bin Salman called the tariffs on Canadian oil a gift from God, according to a source cited by the Financial Times. This is revenge served ice cold. The projection of American power depends entirely on the perception of American competence. A country that cannot fuel its own refineries because it picked a fight with its best friend does not project competence. It projects chaos. It projects decline. The pipeline shutdown is not just an energy problem. It is a billboard visible from Moscow and Beijing and Riyadh, advertising that America can be brought to its knees by a country of 40 million people that shares its language, its values, and its border. The history here is instructive and terrifying. In 1973, the Arab oil embargo against the United States lasted 5 months. It caused a 400% increase in oil prices. It triggered a recession that lasted 16 months. It caused gas lines that stretched for miles in every major city. It destroyed the Nixon presidency and rewrote American foreign policy for a generation. But in 1973, America imported only 35% of its oil from foreign sources. Today, even with the shale revolution, the U.S. still imports 6.3 million barrels per day, and 4.3 million of that was coming from one country through fixed pipelines that cannot be replaced with tanker shipments. The dependency is deeper, the infrastructure is more specialized, and the global financial system is more leveraged than anything that existed 53 years ago. If this embargo lasts 30 days, the economic damage could rival the 2008 financial crisis. If it lasts 90 days, we are looking at a structural restructuring of the North American economy that will take a decade to unwind. This is exactly what the architects of NAFTA and the original U.S.-Canada Free Trade Agreement warned about when they built the Integrated Energy Framework in the 1980s. They understood that binding the two economies together created mutual vulnerability, mutual dependence, and mutual trust. The deal was simple. Canada gets a guaranteed market for its resources. America gets a guaranteed supply at stable prices. Both sides benefit. Both sides are exposed. Trump broke that compact with the tariffs. And now America is learning what exposure without trust looks like. This is not just about gasoline. This is a stress test of the American Republic. Can the executive branch manage a crisis it manufactured? Can the military be deployed against an ally without destroying NATO and every security alliance America depends on? Can the economy absorb a supply shock this large without tipping into a recession that costs millions of jobs? Can the political system survive the rage of 150 million voters who cannot afford to fill their tanks? These are not academic questions. They are being answered right now at gas stations with empty pumps, in futures pits flashing red, in cabinet rooms filled with panic, and in the frozen pipeline stations along the longest undefended border in the world. We are in uncharted waters. The maps are useless. The compass is spinning. As we head into Sunday night, watch for 3 things. Watch the Asian crude oil futures when they open. If Brent pushes past $120, the contagion spreads to airline stocks, shipping companies, and every consumer discretionary sector on the S&P 500. Pension funds with energy exposure start hemorrhaging. Watch for the Canadian Parliament emergency session scheduled for Monday morning. Carney is expected to present his terms, which reportedly include full tariff reversal, a formal public apology from the president, a $50 billion infrastructure compensation package, and a complete renegotiation of the USMCA trade agreement on Canadian terms. Watch for the president's response Monday morning. It will not be measured. It will not be diplomatic. Sources inside the communications office say the speech being drafted includes language about invoking the Defense Production Act to nationalize segments of domestic oil production and potentially declaring Canada a hostile state for trade purposes. Either of those moves detonates what is left of the North American Economic Partnership and sends a signal to every ally on Earth that America's handshake means nothing. For 70 years, the United States and Canada shared the longest peaceful border in the history of the world. No walls, no troops, no tariffs that mattered. The oil flowed south, the money flowed north. The trust was implicit. That relationship, built across generations, cemented by shared sacrifice in 2 world wars, maintained through the quiet understanding that neighbors do not burn each other's houses down, is on fire tonight. The valves are shut, the pipelines are silent, the price of everything in America just changed, and a president who promised energy dominance is sitting in the Oval Office, watching his country run out of fuel because he thought he could bully the one nation on earth that kept the lights on and the furnaces burning. The pumps are off, the shelves will empty, the maps of American energy security are being redrawn this weekend, and nobody in Washington has a plan. Subscribe, stay tuned. The gas gauge is on empty and the engine is still running.